Welcome to An Unconventional Life, a podcast where we share stories about the crazy 1% out there who earned their doctoral degrees and then went on to use them in crazy, cool, unique, and unconventional ways. Here's your host, astrophysicist turned teacher, author, dissertation coach, and more, Dr. Russell Strickland.
Hello and welcome to An Unconventional Life. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Strickland, the founder and CEO of Dissertation Done, and I have with me today Mark Metry, who is an entrepreneur, author, creator, a mental health advocate, coach, teacher, keynote speaker, podcast host, and loving human being. This is not what he wrote. This is me telling you this, by the way. He's interviewed over 300 top leaders around the world, from billionaire philanthropists to neuroscientists, professional athletes, New York Times bestselling authors, philosophers, and innovative disruptors on his Top 100 Humans 2.0 podcast, which NASDAQ and Yahoo Finance placed in the top 10 growing podcasts you must listen to. So we're honored to have Mark with us today. He is the host of the Social Anxiety Society podcast, and also best-selling author of Screw Being Shy, which we're going to need to talk some more about here. He's been featured in Forbes, done a TEDx talk, Huffington Post, Mindvalley. He's been mentioned alongside of folks like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, and can be found speaking at universities like Rutgers and nonprofits, conferences, high schools, places everywhere around the world. So amazing to get so much done in so little time, Mark. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. And, it's just like you do one thing each day and you just focus on that day. And then next thing you know, you look back and it's like 6 years and you're like, wow, what have I done?
It's amazing. Well, listen, I want to let everybody know just briefly that today's episode is being brought to you by Dissertation Done. And at Dissertation Done, we help adult doctoral students through the dissertation process. If you are facing your dissertation, maybe struggling, slowed, stalled, or just plain stuck, reach out to us at dissertationdone.com/done. We'll have a conversation and see if we might be a good fit to help you through that process. If perhaps you're on the other side of that process and you might want to be a professional coach, expert, consultant, counselor, something like that, the best way to be known as an expert is not only to have the first name doctor, but to have literally written the book in your area of expertise, something that Mark is familiar with. And we can help you with that too, or at least have a conversation to see if we would be a good fit to do so. Go to dissertationdone.com/book, and we'll set up some time to talk. So that's the commercial. Mark, again, thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for creating this platform. And yeah, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
You're so welcome, man. Listen, Screw Being Shy, that obviously came from somewhere. So I got to imagine there's some shyness that you've apparently overcome at this point. But tell folks a little bit about that. What was it like growing up shy, and how did this become your platform?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, for me, I always grew up and people around me told me, oh, you're shy, or you're introverted, or you're quiet. And I don't think there's anything wrong with being shy or being introverted, but it really wasn't until I was 18 where I realized it's actually social anxiety. And then, for me personally, when I was 18, I kind of found myself falling down the spiral where I started to abuse alcohol. I started to abuse food. I was like obese for a period. I got seriously depressed. My lifelong social anxiety turned into social isolation. And I was actually suicidal for a period of time. And when I experienced that, it kind of changed my entire life and really led me to realize like, oh, Mark, this isn't something that you're going to naturally grow out of. This is actually something that you need to learn about and deal with and learn from the experts and get help. Or else I'm going to be a statistic, and all of the things I want to do in the world, all my dreams, they're going to die with me. And so for me, when I experienced that, that was really a wake up call, and it really triggered this whole journey that I'm on of like me learning about health, me learning about my mind, learning about my brain. Eventually that led me to starting a podcast in like 2017, where I started to network, get access to like some of the top leaders in various industries. I started to learn how to tell my story. I became a public speaker. And then eventually I became an author. And then I helped different organizations, companies, people kind of deal and do the same thing that I did. And so, honestly, like I honestly didn't really want to write my book, to be honest. And it really wasn't until, I got invited to basically speak in like every major city in the US in 2019. And I noticed that the same exact thing would happen to me at every single one of these events. There would always be at least like one person who would walk up to me after, who I could tell was like very, very shy, very, very introverted. Maybe they had social anxiety. They would kind of look down. Maybe they would stutter, or they would blush, or they would sweat, or their fingers would tremble. And they would ask me the same question. And they would say, "Hey, Mark, how did you go from someone who faced like debilitating social anxiety, depression, suicide, to be able to like speak confidently and tell your story in front of hundreds of people?" And so when that kept on happening to me, and then I also just looked around in terms of the market, I looked around in terms of who was talking about this. And the reality is, like, there weren't that many books. And if there were books, they were just very advanced and they were very, very technical, written by like clinical psychologists and whatnot. There are definitely a few couple good books that I could recommend, but I realized, like, man, there's so many people who are facing this problem. And yet a lot of the solutions, a lot of the ways that people deal with this, it's not really common sense. Like, there's such a lack of education. And I felt like I was in a position where I honestly just had the responsibility to speak up for the sake of like the younger version of myself. And so at the time when I launched the book, like, it wasn't even in line with like my brand or anything. I was just like, I literally have to write this as like a guide to like give to people. It's like, hey, here's understanding like the root cause. Here's step one, here's step two, here's step three, based on like my story, based on like the scientific literature that I could understand and cite, based on other experts. And so I had to do that. And it's also an audiobook too, on Audible, that like I narrated, and I had a friend of mine interview me in between the chapters. So yeah, it was definitely an amazing experience for sure.
So definitely there are two things that I really want to hammer home about that story. People that are wondering, okay, Mark sounds cool, but why is he on the show? We're talking about getting our dissertations and everything. Two reasons why Mark's on the show today, and he's hit on both of those already. Number one, a lot of folks who are working on their doctoral degrees are introverts. They're kind of shy. Maybe they don't have that debilitating social anxiety that you mentioned, but certainly have some issues that they might want to work through. Not necessarily to change being introverted versus extroverted. That's a bigger thing. But being able to function and do the things that they want to do with some confidence and some amount of comfort, a level of being at ease doing it. So that's one thing that I definitely want to talk about some today. And then the other is, look at all the expert platform that you built up now around this issue. So the issue itself, I think, is important to folks, but the notion of building up that expert platform is also very important. So let's start off with the first of those, though. What would you tell folks in terms of what you've learned about sort of overcoming this social anxiety? Maybe a little bit for folks that really have serious anxiety issues, and then some folks that are not so maybe clinically anxious anxiety issues, but definitely have a hard time with stepping out of their shell when they want or need to.
Yeah, definitely. So to address the first one in terms of people who have social anxiety. So again, I don't think there's like a one size fits all. I think everyone's different. There's different layers to it. But honestly, what I have seen based on my own personal experience, based on like the science that I've read, based on the experts I've talked to, I think there's three like main kind of ways that people with social anxiety can start to do to sort of get long-term results. Because a lot of the times, like, you read an article or you listen to a podcast that like tells you to be more confident, but it just sort of addresses the kind of surface layer. And so for me, the three biggest things I've learned is, number one, doing something called exposure therapy. So there are 4 different layers of social anxiety: physical appearance, social skills, your character, personality, and then the signs of anxiety itself. And so you can work with a professional, you can do by yourself. There's different strategies to go about it, but basically you incrementally expose yourself to these different layers. So for example, personally for me, I kind of grew up where my family was kind of on the lower side of the socioeconomic spectrum, grew up kind of poor. but I remember living and growing up in an area that was quite affluent. And so I remember kind of going to school every day as a kid and like wearing the same clothes while like everyone else around me would wear like all these great clothes. And, some people would make fun of me and so on. And so one of the things that I had to do was like put myself in positions to where I could expose myself to that fear. So for example, I would go to like the most crowded public area, like a mall, and I would purposely wear like the most outrageous clothes, like the craziest clothes. Like I would wear like this like pink cowboy hat. I'd wear like a pink neon shirt. I wear like shorts that were pretty short on me. And I would literally just do that to condition my mind to be like, hey, Mark, there's literally people looking at you who are like, what the hell is that guy doing? What is he wearing? And again, like there's incremental steps, there's layers to it. I don't recommend like jumping in it, head on. So that's one. Number two is I would say like mindfulness meditation. I know Stanford in 2009 did a study that showed how mindfulness meditation is actually equally as effective as most kinds of treatment right now for anxiety. And so there's many different ways to do it. I know meditation is sort of like a hot topic. I actually partly teach like a meditation like course track. And so meditation is huge. And then the last but not least, is I would urge people to learn more about this thing called your gut microbiome. I'm sure you've heard of it, but basically it is like a vast ecosystem of trillions of bacteria that a lot of the leading science now is saying has to do very much with how your brain processes the world, from your neurotransmitters to like one of the biggest nerves that we have in our bodies called the vagus nerve that directly connects from your gut to your brain. And so like this is an area of science that I know like has sort of recently been uncovered over the last 10 years. And there's studies that show like working on your gut microbiome, eating certain foods, limiting certain foods has actually been shown to help people with social anxiety. So I think out of all the things that I've learned, those three are like some of the three most standard, like foundational steps that I could recommend to people. So yeah, when it comes to the other side of that, if you're just like an introvert, or if you're just like a little shy, or if you're someone who just likes, quiet solitude, what I would say is like, you need to build an environment, you need to build a tool that works for you. So I think a lot of the times, like we live in a world where it's very much, now it's starting to change, but it's very much built for extroverts, right? And so there's all these different kinds of events, you go to school, you go to class, you go to college, you go to, you learn, you're always talking to people. And so this world is largely built for extroverts. It's slowly starting to change because of like the internet, because of what's happened over the last couple of years. And so what I would say is build a platform that works for you. So what I mean by that is, like, for example, on LinkedIn, I have like 105,000 followers. I get I get hundreds of messages a day of people, college kids, younger, older, who ask me all the time, like, hey, Mark, can I pick your brain? Can I talk to you? And a lot of the times, like when you sort of do that, you're kind of like fighting an uphill battle. And so for me, like one of the things that I learned is like, hey, if I can start a platform, or if I can start like an authentic social media presence where I can be like, hey guys, like here's who I am authentically. Here are the things that I care about. Here's what I love talking about. Here's like what I want to stick up most for in the world. Right. Then what happens is when people meet you or when people talk to you, they already have an idea of who you are and what's the most important to you. And I know for introverts, that's like a huge thing. A lot of introverts, they don't like small talk. They don't like shallow talk. They don't like fake superficial conversations. And so if someone already knows you, they already know what you talk about. When they meet you, it like skips that whole bridge. And they're like, hey, I saw you, 2 weeks, you talked about this thing. And you can sort of immediately get engaged. And when you do that, you're going to notice that like a part within you kind of like lights up and like you're able to like speak up regardless of any kind of like nerves or if you're uncomfortable. And so those are like two sort of the sides of the coin that I could recommend people towards, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So with what you were just talking about, that resonates with exactly what we talk to people about in terms of writing their expert book. Because you put out there who you are, who you authentically are, what you're like, and don't really try to change yourself much at all. And when you do that, in ways that can still be difficult for an introvert, but certainly easier if you're talking to a camera, if you're writing, if you're doing things like that. When you do that, what you're doing is you're sending out signals to everybody listening, and some of those people are being pushed away from you, and some of those people are being drawn in. Don't worry about the people you're pushing away. In fact, you want to make sure that you're pushing some people away. Otherwise, you're not being decisive enough. You're not making a point, and you're not standing for anything. If you're not, if some people don't disagree with you, then you're not really saying anything. So that's fine. Don't worry about that. But the people who do agree with you, now they're drawn close. They've heard what you have to say. And yes, the conversation has already started at that point, which I know for myself as an introvert, that's the big deal. It's not hard to be part of a conversation, but just getting through that initial phase of we're not really talking about anything, so why are we doing this? That's the hard part. So yeah, I 100% agree with that. As a way of both building your platform and building a platform that is perfectly suited to someone who might be an introvert.
Yeah, I love that. And I mean, I can give another tip. One thing that I learned is like at a personal level in terms of introverts, like I know one of the sub chapters of my book is called pretend to be an extrovert sometimes. And what I mean by that, I'm not talking about socially speaking. I'm not talking about you pretending to be someone else. But what I'm talking about is like when you look at the psychology definition of what it means to be an introvert, all it means is that your brain has a natural tendency to be more introspective. Like your natural point of attention is sort of like on your internal world. And like if you're a writer, if you're any kind of a thought leader, that's a beautiful, beautiful gift. But also that can be quite confusing sometimes. And so what I recommend people to do is like go for this thing called like a mindful walk. And so what I do like every morning, or I try to do it every morning, is like I leave my phone behind. And like what I do is like first thing I wake up, I go outside and I just go for a walk, and I just try to purposely focus on my external environment. I try to look at the trees. I try to focus on my breath. I try to like smell, really be mindful and go into the external world. Because a lot of the times, like you need that balance. Like even the most introverted introverts, just in terms of your brain, you need to sometimes step outside of your mind. And so I find that like doing and kind of like becoming an extrovert when it comes to your environment in terms of focusing on the external world. And sometimes that can kind of like help reset your brain and then help you get back and kind of like be more introspective, which, you need to be an author, to be like a thought leader. That's your gift, and so that's a huge tip too, that really helps me as well.
Yeah, it's a good, it's a good point in general to go out and take some time, to I won't say commune with nature, but to put yourself in an environment where you can think through things and connect to the rest of your world as well. It's a very good way of processing and problem solving. I think a lot of times when people talk about meditation, you just need to give yourself a moment to stop sometimes in order for your brain to do some really impressive work. So it connects in a lot of different ways. There was something you touched on a little earlier though that I was very interested in. You mentioned the exposure therapy, so that's out there. I understand that that's something that a lot of people do for a lot of things. Is you expose yourself to something that you're fearful of. It can help you get over it, but you have to be careful about how you do that. Mindfulness and meditation, and that was not unlike what we were just talking about in terms of going out, taking a walk, and they're different, but they key on similar things. Then you mentioned the whole idea of the gut biome, which I honestly hadn't connected those things ever before, and it got me thinking. I mean, are there certain things that people would do? Okay, if you're introverted, you should try doing this specifically, try doing that specifically to help with the gut biome maybe being a cause of issue for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not sure in terms of being introvert, but I know in terms of anxiety, it can definitely be, and specifically social anxiety. I know, like the University of Maryland did a study with people who have social anxiety, and they found that, like the ones who, like they took a group and they had them focus on their gut microbiome, which is basically like eliminate like processed foods, just eat natural whole foods, and then eat things that like have bacteria in them, like good bacteria. So like yogurt, like sauerkraut, like prebiotics, things like that. And they found that there was definitely a noticeable difference in people who do it. And part of the reason why I think is because, so like there's a theory out there that says, part of your brain over thousands of years has specialized through a specific neurotransmitter called serotonin in detecting how you stack based on society's hierarchy and based on what your brain thinks it is. This is why people with social anxiety often have faced some kind of like poverty, discrimination, some sort of an abuse that their brain kind of tells them like, you suck, you don't deserve to be here, you're at the bottom of society. And it's not just your thoughts, like literally a part of your brain is sending you those messages. And what they found is that part of how your brain gathers that data to make sure that serotonin is being used properly is through your gut microbiome. I think they found something like 90% of the data that your brain gets to do this is actually from your gut microbiome. And so it's definitely a new area. I recommend people like look into it. And then also it's also called like nutritional psychiatry as well. And it's actually like blowing up and it's really becoming very popular because a lot of the times, like people who have faced a life of anxiety and depression like me, like you're stuck in that, and there's very, 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 very few things that can like physically shift your state of mind, and a lot of the times like you're stuck in the state of mind. And so like, unless you experience like an experience that kind of like slaps you in the face, it can be very, very difficult to even realize where you're in and how to get out of that. And so that's why they found like focusing on nutrition, focusing on your gut microbiome can be one of the things that is a part of your long-term kind of habits that can actually physically shift your body, help shift your body out of fight or flight because of how connected it is to your nerves, like on a regular basis. And so it's definitely a new area of science, but I definitely recommend people to look into it. It's very, very, very fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I have not thought about it in that way before, that those things should be connected. And so, if you haven't heard about it before, you heard it here first. Maybe we'll be hearing more about that in the months and years to come. So obviously getting your head right, helping yourself to feel that you can do these things is very important. And let me just take a quick break there. I know you said something earlier. I mentioned folks that are introverts and they want to be able to kind of not be as shy. Definitely did not mean to say that there's anything wrong with being an introvert. That's just the way. That's an affect. That's part of your personality. But the anxiety that could accompany being in sort of extrovert type situations as an introvert, that's the thing that I was really talking about overcoming. So don't think, again, I feel like I am much more of an introvert than an extrovert. Don't think that that's a reason that, that's something that's wrong. It's just that there are times when you want to be able to put yourself out there and to be able to interact with people in certain ways. And so that's what I was getting at with that question earlier. But anyway, that being said, so you want to get your head in the right space and feel comfortable and confident in doing some of these things. Can you tell people once they've accomplished that, how do they then go about coming up with some of these other things that you've been able to accomplish already in terms of working with Forbes and TEDx and Huffington Post and interviewing some of these different folks that you have, getting themselves out there and actually having a personal brand that can really help them to grow a business that will help other people as an expert. What's your advice as far as that's concerned?
Yeah, definitely. So personally for me, like I did all that, what you're saying, basically off the back of LinkedIn and podcasting. Like when I first started, I literally had no idea what I was doing. I'm sure same as a lot of people. But just over the days and weeks and months, I started to post content on LinkedIn. I started my own podcast, and like that really kind of gave me like an excuse to like reach out to people. Like that's really, what it was. And I found for me, like as an introvert, a lot of the times, like, doing that stuff is very nerve wracking because you think like, how are they going to say yes? Or like, who am I to do these things? And so for me, like what I think is very important is like you build some sort of a system that you can work on day by day, week by week, that a year, 2 years, 3 years from now can take you to where you want to go. And so I personally, I don't know anything better. That's a better excuse to reach out to people other than like having a podcast. Yeah. And like, listen, like when I started my podcast, like I had no idea what I was doing. When I first started it, it was like originally about technology. And then it like shifted to like entrepreneurship, and then eventually kind of went into like health and wellness, and then mental health, and then like, you know, like that stuff. And so it was definitely an evolution. And so what I would say to people is like, don't be afraid to evolve, you know, don't be afraid to like transition, because I don't think you're going to figure it out on the first shot, you know? And I think again, like as long as you are like respectful, as long as like you're not spreading lies or anything, I think there's like very few things that can go wrong if you're just trying to show up as yourself. And then I think too, like a big thing is like trying to wrap yourself, not necessarily not trying to make it around you, but trying to wrap yourself around a bigger idea or like a thesis that you have around the world that you can sort of use as like a front cover to approach people and say like, hey, I'm interested in, you know, I have no idea. Like, I don't know, you know, if you reach out to like, hey, if you're talking to authors, you're like, hey, I'm interested in like, you know, if you're an introvert, extrovert, you know, I don't know. And so like kind of approach them through that. LinkedIn is obviously like a great networking tool. You can literally use it on your phone. And so, yeah, I think the biggest thing that I would say is like, start some sort of a system, start some sort of a vehicle that you can take incremental steps on day by day, week by week, month by month, that can take you to where you want to go, you know, years from now. Because eventually, like that's how you really build anything successful. It takes years and of like daily actions, weekly actions. And so I think a podcast or like starting a newsletter or starting something where you can invite people, and it's a mutually beneficial kind of value add for both of them. You're not just like some random person on LinkedIn who's like, hey, can I pick your brain? You know, and if they have like 1,000 messages in a month, very, very high chance that you're going to get lost in the dust. And then I know a lot of people who are first starting to do that, they'll see that and it'll discourage them a lot, you know? And so you have to be sure to like also manage your expectations and also just have like a realistic output on how like others may treat you and how you may not be successful at first, but you probably will. And I heard this great quote, and it's like, you shouldn't think in probabilities, you should think in possibilities, you know? And so for me, when I was starting my podcast, I was like 20 years old. I had no idea what I was doing, like literally no idea. So many people said no to me. I had so many different failures, so many different errors and glitches and mess ups and whatnot. But each one of those, you just course correct, you know, and then you look back like 5 years later and you're like, wow, I've really started something amazing. So I think that's my best advice.
Yeah, and I think that's true, that anything that you work on, you're going to grow in that process. We talk to our doctoral students all the time about, go back and read what you wrote 3 months ago, 6 months ago. You'll be amazed at how horrible you were and you were defending it. And that's not a slight on where you are right now. It's a talk about the journey and the transformation that happens in this process. So I think that's very, very spot on. Any specific advice on, you know, getting a well, you mentioned a system. What's your system for your podcast and growing that? How can you explain that to folks?
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, I don't think I have like a straight up system. I mean, I ran like a podcast agency for a while, but I've kind of like shifted away from that. But yeah, I mean, I think what it is just like kind of similar to, I assume, how you would make like a dissertation or like a thesis. Like you have different examples of the world. You maybe have different talking points or different topics that you want to explore. And then you like look around and you just like try to look at who's already doing this in the world, you know, like who's doing this, so that not only I can like learn from them, but then also when you upload that on like a podcast, in terms of like your brand, in terms of how people see you, that completely changes. You know, like for me, there's so many people, you know, from like Jay Shetty to like Seth Godin to Dr. Nicole LePera, who are all people who have like millions of followers. Like when I had those people on my podcast, when I could create content around them, when I could speak next to them, like literally in person, those things completely change the game. And then it opens the door for people like in Forbes and TEDx to see like, oh, wow, this isn't like some random guy who's just like out here doing it. Like he's actually got some recognition because the top people in the industry are also kind of interacting with them and like respect them to a certain degree.
So you think that those particular types of exposures, Forbes and TEDx and those sorts of things, came from the podcast guests that you brought on?
Yeah. So I mean, I'll tell you, like, for example, Forbes. So this is a time where I think I was around like episode 30, like 30s, 40s in my podcast, like early on. And basically what I would do in my podcast is like, I would just like find a topic that I would really want to learn for myself. And so at that time it was like meditation. And so basically what I did is like, I just researched who are like the top 25 experts in meditation that I should talk to. And so out of those 25 people, probably like 5 of them said yes to be on my show. Okay. And then one person specifically, I mean, his name is Rob Dubay. He like runs a very successful company. He's also an author, podcaster. And so I reached out to him just kind of randomly, and he joined like my Zoom call, or he joined the recording that we were doing on the day of. And I remember he told me, he was like, I had no idea like what this was. I was like, man, some random kid is just interviewing me. Yeah. And then I interviewed him, like nothing happened. And then I think about a year later or a year and a half later, he reaches back out to me through LinkedIn. Yeah. And he says, and this is also a time where my podcast started to become successful. And so more people started to listen to it. He reaches out to me and he says, hey, Mark, like, it's been so great to like see your journey over the years. You actually inspired me to start my own podcast. And then he's like an editor at Forbes. And so he said like, I want you to come to New York City, come to like their office, and I want to interview him on a podcast, and it'll also be on Forbes. And so it's like, wow, okay. So I just kind of showed up as myself. And again, like a lot of these things, it has to do with like odds, you can't guarantee this stuff, but it's just like, if you put in the numbers and if you show that person that like, you're not about the money per se, you're not just trying to sell something, but you're just like a real person who like genuinely wants to help people, other people see that in you too. And if you can connect with them like on social media or something, and they can like kind of see how your journey is progressing through like your content, through like keeping up with them on email or text messages, then next thing you know, man, just like crazy opportunities, start to happen. Same with TEDx, same with the first time I got invited to speak for the first time in Boston. And so all these things, like at first, they kind of happened randomly, but it was a result of like hundreds of actions that were building momentum that I honestly had no idea at the time, so it's sort of like a game, sort of a mystery, but you can't, like, the more shots you take, the more authentic shots you take, the more chances you have of it happening,
Yeah. And this isn't about, knocking on doors and having them closed in your face. This is just you doing your thing. And it's the old thing about it takes a lot of hard work to become an overnight success. That once you hit this sort of tipping point, you get to the point where these opportunities are chasing after you to an extent. And
yeah, for sure. And yeah,
being present, being out there.
Yeah, for sure. And like there's been like, and then from that Forbes like article, I can't even tell you how many opportunities I've gotten. Like I actually, before COVID, I got reached out by like one of the biggest like documentary filmmakers like in America, that like if you go on Netflix, a lot of their documentaries are on there. And they reached out to me and they're like, hey, Mark, we're creating literally like a series on mental health, and we want to feature you in an episode. And so like they literally came to my house like 4 months ago. And then even before COVID, like literally full production shoot, everything. I had no idea, but like all these opportunities, they build off each other. And so like it's all sort of a combination of like trying to basically be yourself as consistently as possible in different mediums that people are realistically consuming on a daily basis, whether that's LinkedIn, whether that's podcasts, whether that's YouTube, whether that's public events. And so trying to do that, trying to network, trying to show yourself, trying to help other people, trying to give other people a platform, like what you're doing right now, like this huge, and like for all like when you post this podcast and I promote it and someone's like, oh my God, like I've been wanting to get my dissertation. I've been wanting to get, oh, I need to,
Right.
like, literally, and it happens, and day by day. And it's sort of like math plus creativity, and so it can be a little difficult. But that's the best thing that I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. I mean, the idea of just being out there, putting yourself out there, and doing the things that attract the type of people that you can best serve. That's what gives you that edge eventually. And the nice thing about it is it's not hard work. You're not knocking on doors and getting them slammed in your face, because you're just out there helping them the best way you can. And at some point, you hit that tipping point where people really know who you are and they start to come to you instead of the other way around.
Dude, it's honestly awesome. Like, I literally, like, sometimes I'll be on Instagram and like I'll see some person that has like 1 million followers, and then like I'll like some of their posts, and then all of a sudden I'll see like they just like follow me and they like some of my posts and they comment on my posts, and then they DM me and they say like, hey Mark, thank you so much for following me. You know what? Actually, this guy 2 weeks ago at dinner actually brought you up. Oh, thank you for following me. And then it's like, wow, that's kind of random, but like all these different connection points, and like people talk to other people. The world is actually a pretty small place if you really, really think about it. Obviously, it's huge, but all these things start to happen, and so there's no really way to predict it. But I think, like you said, like if you can set up the right systems, foundations, then eventually people start kind of coming to you, and like really, really nice stuff happens in you.
Very cool. I really I like the message, and I think it's very helpful to our folks who have the expertise and want to be able to get it out there into the world. This is a great way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And like, again, I don't have my doctorate. So like, if I can do it, like literally any of you guys can do it. So
Yeah, no, 100%. Because that's the thing. There are all sorts of places that you can learn from, and all sorts of ways that you can learn. And the fact that you've been able to do this and self-reflective enough to understand kind of what it was that worked, and that's awesome. I mean, I think that's really cool. Now I understand that you're kind of helping folks with some of this stuff through like coaching and things like that now, right? Is that correct?
yeah, for sure. So it kind of started through just like being able to like speak at different companies, help like HR, like people in kind of executive positions with dealing with like their employees, or like other team members. But I also, yeah, I mean, I like literally coach. I'm super grateful to be able to say like I literally coach CEOs. I have a client of mine who's like a professional athlete, all people who like are very successful, who face social anxiety, to college students. And so, yeah, I like work with people one-on-one. I also have like a fully like automated online course that I tried my best to make affordable, that people can check out too, as a way to like, scale myself. So yeah, I have all kinds of resources for that.
That's another valuable lesson to folks who want to be in that expert space, is that at some point you do have to be able to scale yourself. So it's a little more of an advanced concept, but it's important. So if people wanted to reach out to you about any of this, maybe work with you, work through some of those issues themselves, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, so the best way by far is if you go to my website, which is my first and last name.com, MarkMetry.com. If you go there, you'll see like an email box.
Yeah.
And if you put your email in, you'll be subscribed to my email newsletter. And every week I send out like 2-3 purely educational articles around all this stuff. And if you respond to any of those emails, it'll go directly to me, and I respond to every single one of those. That's the best way for like a guaranteed response. And yeah, I love hearing back from people. And, this is like literally my life's purpose. I wouldn't do anything else. So I'm always happy to help people in any kind of capacity at all, even if it's just answering questions or anything like that. So.
All right. Now that's markmetry.com. And then I heard you mention Instagram a little bit earlier too. Are you on some of the other social platforms?
Yeah. I think my two biggest platforms are probably LinkedIn, Instagram. Okay. It's just my first and last name, MarkMetry. And then if you add me on LinkedIn, definitely try to send me a personalized connection request and say that you listen to this podcast, so I can make sure to accept you.
Okay, cool. So we're going to be your in. That's it. Okay, we got the direct line to Mark here. So we'll put all of those connections, by the way, in our show notes. So if you want to go to dissertationdone.com/blog, You can find Mark's episode there. However you happen to be listening to it now, it'll have his all of his connection points there in case you missed something just then. So, Mark, awesome, man. This was great. I really appreciate you being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to everyone out there for listening too. This was like an awesome experience. I appreciate you all.
So cool, man. Listen, just remind everybody briefly that today's episode has been brought to you by Dissertation Done. So if you are a doctoral student working through the dissertation process and you think you might need a little bit of guidance, support, and direction, reach out to us at dissertationdone.com/done. We'll have a conversation. If it's a good fit, maybe we can help you out. And again, if you want to throw your own shingle out there, we can help with at least you getting that book written. We'll take you from a blank page to a published author in less time than you can imagine. And we start that process by having you head over to dissertationdone.com/book. And again, we'll just set up a conversation and talk. So that's us. This is Mark Metry. Thank you so much for being here, talking to people about how to overcome social anxiety and then reach out there and become what looks like an extrovert for all intents and purposes, but I know you know the difference. It's all about being out there and helping people. And that's easy for you to do, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert.
Woo! Thank you for having me. This was awesome.
And to everyone else, have a wonderful day and go out and live your unconventional life. Bye, friends.
This has been An Unconventional Life. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe now to keep getting inspirational stories of unconventional lives as soon as they're released. Until then, go out and live your best unconventional life.